also tell me a little bit about your thoughts on sort of the progress narrative?
So I suppose it might be a question of thinking a bit more carefully about what looks like progress.
Hi Amanda, so my name's Isha. I'm the co-president of the Climate Society and I'm also an undergraduate biologist in my third year.
Nice to meet you. I'm Amanda Power, I'm a medieval historian.
What do you think about the concept of the Anthropocene? Because I know that it's thought that the human impact on the environment isn't something that we can sort of ascribe to one point, and there's actually been a series of turning points. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that and sort of where the big influences began happening.
One of the things that historians are worried about with the idea of the Anthropocene is it tends to universalise the blame so that all humans are equally responsible. So other ideas have been proposed that highlight different parts of the problem. So the idea of the Capitalocene is chosen to highlight the role of capitalism in creating the situation. There's another one, the Plantationocene, that looks at colonialism as the cause of or European colonialism as the cause of the problem. And then there are other ones that look much further back, sort of first use of fire. And I think it's quite helpful to have a concept that you can shift around a bit like that. I think Anthropocene actually does point to quite a lot of different, you can interpret it in quite a lot of different ways to find different parts of the problem.
Mm-hmm. And could you also tell me a little bit about your thoughts on sort of the progress narrative and the idea of development always being driven towards overconsumption and how that sort of led us to where we are today?
Yeah, I think that's a really important element of this actually, this assumption that everything that we do pretty much is progress, and so it's very hard to go backwards. So one of the things that I've been quite interested in is there's a narrative that you build particular kinds of civilization, often city-states or states that very intensively agricultural states, and once you've done that you can't undo it. So you've got very, very strong narratives that if you go back or you let nature come back or you stop controlling everything for just a second, then you're not being properly human.
That's interesting then, I guess, because that looks at the way that we've sort of built this relationship with nature to sort of be us manipulating nature rather than being part of it. And I wonder if, has it always been like that throughout medieval history, or is there things that can teach us about how we might go forward now?
Well, I think it would be helpful if we could disaggregate a sense of progress from a sense of domination over nature, so not marking out progress by how much we think we can control things. But I think also recognising what keeps spilling out the edge of these narratives. So every time you try and control something, it'll often make the situation worse, and then you'll have to adopt another measure of control that's even more rigorous. And so it does lock you into a set of actions. So I suppose it might be a question of thinking a bit more carefully about what looks like progress, and whether it really looks the way we think it looks.
Mm-hmm. I guess I was also going to ask about the time pre-enclosures and sort of how land privatization has had an impact on how we view the landscape as well, and then I guess how that's led to agriculture being something that was very private.
Yeah, I think the sense of land as a resource that belongs to particular people and often very concentrated, so that only relatively small groups of society control large areas of land, and other people are either excluded or enserfed or enslaved on it. It does maybe break certain kinds of relationships with the land and reform them around a sort of purely profit motive, or very largely profit motive. So it tends to lead to poor stewardship of the land as well. So I think that sort of sense of land as property to generate wealth rather than places where people live that they care about is a really decisive shift that could bear being unravelled. So when you chose to study biology, was it specifically with an eye to climate?
It's always been something that's been on my radar a little bit at school, and my favourite part of biology has sort of always been the interaction between the scientific understanding of how things work and then how that plays out in society and culture.
And so thinking about those things, does that make you optimistic about particular ways that you as a biologist might be able to engage with the problems?
Well, with my work with Climate Society, we do a lot of work with youth. Specifically this year, I'm looking to go to COP30 and try and make the negotiation tracks more accessible to students and youth, because I think it's really important that we communicate the big policy changes that are happening and make sure that issues that people are thinking about at, sort of on the bottom-up level and communities are translated to the top, so that power can sort of be shifted to the people, I guess. And can I also ask a little bit about what you think the role climate education plays in the school system outside of just the sciences? Because I know that you've been involved in sort of integrating climate into history curricula. It would be nice to hear a little bit more about that.
So I think a lot of work in schools focuses on behaviour change, and that's sort of down to can you recycle, which is fine, but it doesn't help students and young people growing up to understand this is a sort of wider cultural problem. It's like a sort of series of boxes that maybe you could tick. It's an outcome of a long set of habits of thinking in some cultures and some parts of the world at some points in time. And I think if you see it like that, then you've got an awful lot more agency. And I think what people desperately need is agency rather than very determinist narratives where this is just happening. And particularly if you're a young person, it's going to be too late by the time you get there.
Yeah, I like to understand climate as sort of a stress multiplier, so something that doesn't exist as sort of a biological or scientific concept, but interacts with society and culture. And I guess, what have the challenges been that you found working on climate in a field that isn't scientific?
It was always treated as something you could figure out in kind of physical and natural sciences. And I think humanities people tended to think, well, okay, that's what they're doing and we'll keep on doing what we're doing. And I think it took a long time so that once it was established that it was definitely anthropogenic in causes, then that was one way of humanities coming in to ask questions. And it's affected a lot the way people do, particularly modern and post-industrial histories. But I think across the wider humanities, it's felt like a rather specialised area of research. And I think it's taken a while to incorporate it as something that we can all be thinking about, that's just sort of there in the world.
Thanks so much for answering the questions, Amanda. It was really, really lovely to talk to you.
Very interesting questions to be asking.